Children see the things that grown men have trained themselves to overlook. I have stood my post in Harrowgate Palace for 19 years, and if you ask me what I have learned in all that long discipline, that would be the heart of it. A man learns to look at a room the way he is told to look at it. A child looks at the room that is actually there. It was the Princess Maelin who first showed me the small wrong thing, and she was 8 years old, and she nearly was not believed at all. I will tell it the way it happened because the way it happened matters. People who hear the ending afterwards say it was obvious that any fool could have seen the shape of it. They are wrong. It was not obvious. It was buried under 100 ordinary days and a man's good name and the particular blindness that comes over a whole house when it has decided, all together and without ever saying so, that a certain person is to be trusted past all question. That blindness is more dangerous than any sword. I have seen it kill men. That winter, in a quieter way, it very nearly killed the truth. My name is Corwin Vael. I am a sergeant of the household foot of the Royal House of Harrowgate in the Kingdom of Eldermore, and I have stood the inner posts of the palace since I was a young man with more pride than sense. Most of what a guard does is nothing. That is the trade. You stand. You watch. You do not move, you do not speak, you do not let your face tell the room what your eyes have noticed. The whole art of it is in the noticing, and in giving no sign that you have noticed at all. A man who looks like a statue learns more in an hour than a man who looks like he is listening learns in a year. People say a great deal in front of furniture. The post I held that winter was the long gallery, the corridor that runs the spine of the old wing, hung with the painted faces of the Harrowgates going back 400 years. It is a cold, beautiful place. At one end is the door to the Queen's private apartments. At the other, past the portraits and the tall windows and the worn place in the marble where 10,000 boots have stood before mine, is the door to the offices of the Crown's household, the counting rooms, the seal room, the archive of the realm's accounts. Between those two doors I stood, 6 hours at a stretch, and watched the people of the palace go by. Queen Saralind ruled in Eldermore then, as she rules now, a steady, principled woman who had carried the crown since her own mother's death, and who governed with a plainness that her courtiers sometimes mistook for softness. They were wrong about that too. She had a way of asking a quiet question that left a clever man with nothing to stand on. Her consort, the Prince Consort Aldrich, was a gentle scholar of a man who loved the realm's old books better than its politics, and he had given her 2 children, the Prince Joran, who was 10 and already too serious by half, and the Princess Maelin, who was 8 and who saw everything. I had known the children since they were small enough to be carried past my post asleep. The prince was correct and reserved with the guard, as he had been taught to be. The princess was not. From the time she could walk, she had treated the men on the posts as fixed features of her world, like the fountains and the great clock, and being a curious creature, she had decided early that the fixed features were worth investigating. She would stop in front of me and study my face for the small signs that I was a person and not a carving, the blink, the breath, the place at my jaw where the strap of the helm pressed. She would tell me things. She told me, over the years, a great deal that no one else in the palace knew, because she had worked out that I would not repeat it and could not, on duty, even answer. I never broke my stillness for her. That was the gift I gave her, though she would not have called it that. To everyone else in the palace she was a small princess to be managed, indulged, hushed, told she was imagining things. To me she was a citizen of the realm reporting what she had seen, and I gave her the dignity of being listened to in silence and taken seriously. Children know the difference. They always know. So when she came to me that gray afternoon in the dead heart of winter, breathless and white about the mouth, and stopped in front of my post and did not say her usual things, I knew before she spoke a word that something was wrong. "Sergeant Vael," she said, not Corwin, which is what she called me when she was being friendly. Sergeant Vael, which is what she called me when she was frightened and trying to be a grown person about it. I have to tell you something, and I think it is important, and I think nobody will believe me." I did not move. I did not look down at her. A man at my post who suddenly bends to talk to a child tells the whole gallery that something is happening, and I did not yet know who in that gallery I did not want watching. So I kept my eyes forward and my voice low, scarcely moving my lips, the way a guard learns to speak when he must. "Then tell me," I said, "and I will believe you until you give me a reason not to. Go slowly." She let out a breath that shook. I heard her gather herself. "You know Master Havern," she said. I knew Master Havern. Everyone in the palace knew Master Havern. Eldred Havern was the keeper of the Privy Purse, the man who held the strings of the crown's money, who counted what came in and signed what went out, who had served the House of Harrowgate for 30 years and the Queen herself for the whole of her reign. He was a tall, dry, courteous man with white hair brushed straight back and a habit of folding his hands when he spoke, as though every word were a small, careful coin he was setting down on a counter. He was trusted absolutely. He was trusted the way the floor is trusted. No one in the palace had thought to wonder about Master Havern in 20 years, and that, though I did not yet know it, was the whole of the problem. "I know him," I said. "I was in the small archive," Maelin said. "The one off the green stair where they keep the old paper. I am allowed. Mama says I am allowed because I am quiet and I put things back. I was looking for the book about the harbor with the ship paintings in it, and I was up on the rolling ladder behind the tall shelf, the one you cannot see past, and I was very quiet because I was reading, and Master Havern came in and he did not know I was there." A small cold thing turned over in my chest. I have learned to trust that feeling. It is not magic. It is the part of a watchman's mind that has been doing the arithmetic all along while the rest of him was standing still. "Go on," I said. "He was not alone," she said. "There was another man with him. I did not see his face properly because the shelf was in the way, but he had a green coat with a gold collar, the kind the men from the Treasury House wear when they come, and he had a leather case. And they were talking quietly, the way grown-ups talk when they think a room is empty." "What did they say?" She screwed her face up, the way she did when she was reaching for an exact thing, and was afraid of getting it wrong. "Master Havern said," he said, "the Lammas figures will not survive a true audit, but there will be no true audit because I am the one who orders them." She opened her eyes. And the other man laughed, but quietly, not a real laugh, and he said, "And the new clerk, the honest one." And Master Havern said, "The honest ones are easily managed. You give them more work than they can finish, and then you blame them when something is wrong. By the spring he will have resigned in disgrace, and no one will ever look at his books, because they will have already decided he is the fool who lost the count." I stood very still, and now the stillness was not for the gallery. It was for myself, because a child of 8 does not invent that. A child of 8 does not know the word audit, does not know what the Lammas figures are, does not understand the slow, cruel machinery of giving an honest man too much work so that his failure can be arranged in advance. She had not understood the half of what she was telling me. She had simply carried it, word for word, the way a clear glass carries water, and set it down in front of me unspilled. "Maelin," I said quietly, "did they see you?" "No," her voice wobbled. "I kept very still. I learned it from you." I held my breath when I needed to, and I did not let the ladder creak, and they went out the other door and I came straight here, but Sergeant Vael, and now it all came out in a rush. I tried to tell Nurse Odell first, and she said I had a fever coming and made me drink the bitter tea, and I tried to tell the Lady Brienne, and she laughed and said Master Havern is the best and kindest man in the palace, and I must have dreamed it. And I think if I tell Mama she will believe me, but she will believe me the way grown-ups believe children, which is not the same as believing. And then she will ask Master Havern, and he will fold his hands and explain it, and everyone will say poor little Maelin and her stories, and I will have warned him, and then—" She stopped. She was crying now, silently, furiously, the way a proud child cries when no one will take her seriously. And then he will get away with whatever it is. And I do not know what it is, but I know it is wrong. I could hear that it was wrong. I will tell you the truth about that moment, because it is the only thing in this whole account that I am proud of, and a man my age has earned the right to claim one thing. I believed her. Not because I had proof. I had nothing but the testimony of a frightened 8-year-old that the most trusted man in the palace was a thief. Every grown soul she had told had patted her on the head. The easy thing, the safe thing, the thing that would have cost me nothing, was to do the same, to say there, Your Highness, you have had a fright, you must have misheard, run along to your lessons. That is what a careful man does. A careful man covers himself. A careful man does not stake his 30 years of good service on a story he cannot prove against a man the Queen herself trusts. But I had spent 19 years watching the people of that palace go past my post, and I had spent every one of those years learning to tell the difference between a person who is lying and a person who is telling the truth and being disbelieved. They do not look the same. They have never looked the same. And the child standing in front of me, trembling, certain, terrified that her certainty would be taken from her. She was the second thing. And there was the other matter, the detail. The honest ones are easily managed. The new clerk, the honest one who would resign in disgrace by spring. I had seen that clerk. I had watched him go past my post 100 times in the last 2 months. A young man named Tobias Wren, lately come up from the harbor town, who arrived early and left late and carried his ledgers clutched to his chest like a man holding something precious in a high wind. I had watched him grow grayer and thinner and more frightened as the weeks went on, and I had thought, idly, the way you think about people who go past your post, that the young man was working himself sick, and that someone ought to ease his load. I had not understood that someone was making sure no one would. The pieces did not prove anything, but they fit, and a thing that fits is worth more than a thing that is merely loud. Your Highness, I said, and I used the formal word on purpose, so that she would know I had stopped treating her as a child and started treating her as a witness. Listen to me carefully, because what we do in the next hour matters more than anything either of us has ever done. You were right to come to me. You were right not to warn him. And you are not imagining it. Do you understand me? I believe you completely. She stared up at me. The tears stopped as though a tap had been turned. I have never before or since seen relief land on a human face the way it landed on hers. It was as if she had been carrying a weight she did not have the strength for, and had finally found one other person willing to put a hand under it. You believe me, she repeated, not a question. She was testing the shape of it. I do. Now I need you to do 3 difficult things, and they will be difficult because they are quiet, and quiet is hard when you are frightened. First, you will tell no one else. Not Nurse Odell, not the Lady Brienne, not your brother. Not because they would not believe you, because if word spreads that you saw something, it will reach Master Havern before I am ready, and a cornered man destroys evidence. Do you understand? Our greatest weapon right now is that he does not know he was overheard. We must keep that weapon. I will tell no one, she said. I am very good at saying nothing. I learned it from you. You did. Second, think hard and tell me the leather case the man in the green coat carried. Did he take it out with him or leave it? She thought she was good at this. She did not guess. He took it out, but her eyes went wide. He left a paper, not on purpose. When they were going out the far door, the man in the green coat dropped something off the table, a single sheet, and it went under the long table by the wall, the one with the brass lions on the feet, and neither of them saw it fall, and I did not pick it up because I was too frightened to move until they were gone, and then I just ran to find you. It is still there, under the table, with the brass lions. And there it was, the first hard thing in a case made entirely of soft things. A paper, a real object in a real place that 2 careful men did not know they had left behind. Third, I said, and I kept my voice perfectly level, though my heart had begun to go like a drum. You are going to go and find your lady mother, and you are going to be a perfectly ordinary princess who has had a perfectly ordinary day, and you are going to wait. And when I send you a word, and I will send it through someone you trust, you will come, and you will tell the queen exactly what you told me, in exactly the same words, leaving nothing out and adding nothing. Can you do that?" "Yes," she said, then smaller. "Will I be in trouble?" "No," I said. "You will be the bravest person in this palace, and one day, when you are grown, men who do not know your name will be safer because of what you did today, and they will never know to thank you, and you will have to be content with that. That is what it is to serve. Now go, walk slowly, smile at the Lady Brienne. Be invisible." She drew herself up to the whole of her small height. Something had changed in her in the last 5 minutes. I watched it change. She had come to me a frightened child no one would believe, and she walked away from me a person with a duty. She went down the gallery with her chin level and her step unhurried, and she even paused to look up at one of the dull old portraits as though she had all the time in the world, and I thought, watching her go, that the realm was in better hands than it knew. Then I turned my mind to the paper under the table with the brass lions, and to the very great problem of how a man frozen at his post for the next 2 hours was going to get to it before Master Havern did. There is a discipline in waiting that the impatient cannot understand. The whole of a guardsman's craft is the management of his own urgency. Every nerve in me wanted to break post, walk the 40 paces to the small archive off the green stair, and pull that paper out from under the brass lions before another soul went near it. And every nerve in me was wrong. A sergeant of the household foot does not abandon his post in the middle of a watch. It is the most visible thing a man in my position can do. The whole gallery would see it. The other guards would mark it. The footmen would whisper, and word of an oddity travels through a palace faster than fire through a hayloft. If Master Havern heard, even as a curiosity, the strange story that Sergeant Vael left the long gallery in the dead of his watch and went herring off toward the archives, a clever man would feel the floor shift under him, and a clever man would act. He would go to the archive that night. He would find the paper himself, and he would understand in one cold instant that he had been seen. So I did the hardest thing, which was nothing. I stood my post. I let the clock above the seal room door grind out its minutes. I watched the people of the palace go by, and I gave them my statue's face. And inside, behind the face, I built my plan the way a mason lays a wall, one careful stone at a time. The first stone was simple. I needed the paper, and I could not fetch it myself, and I could not trust it to anyone who might talk. There was exactly one man in the palace I trusted with my whole life, and his name was Corporal Bran Adler, and he was at that hour off watch and asleep in the guardroom, which suited me well, because a man who has just been woken and sent on a quiet errand asks fewer questions than a man you summon with ceremony. The second stone was harder. Suppose I had the paper. Suppose it was everything the child believed it to be, a forged figure, a false seal, a line of writing in 2 different hands. It would still be one sheet of paper against the word of the keeper of the Privy Purse, a man the Queen had trusted for the whole of her reign. Master Havern would fold his hands and explain it. "Oh, that, yes, a working draft, an error caught and corrected. You can see the correction here. The child has misunderstood a perfectly ordinary thing, as children do. And the dreadful part was that it might even sound true. A lie that has had 30 years to build its reputation does not fall to a single sheet of paper. It falls to weight. I needed weight. I needed the paper, and the clerk Tobias Wren, and the books themselves, and I needed all of them brought together in one room before Havern understood what was happening. Because the moment he understood, the books would burn. That was the whole shape of the danger, and I saw it clearly while I stood there with my face turned to nothing. The evidence against Eldred Havern was, at that moment, almost entirely inside his own counting-house, under his own hand, behind a door to which he held the only key that mattered. A thief who keeps the books can unkeep them in an afternoon. Pages can be cut out and rewritten. Ledgers can suffer accidents, a spilled lamp, a flooded cellar, a fire among old papers, such a pity, such an irreplaceable loss. I had seen lesser men cover lesser crimes that way, and Havern was not a lesser man. He was patient and careful, and he had built a fortress of trust around himself for 30 years, and the only crack in that fortress was that, on one gray afternoon, he had spoken too freely in a room he believed was empty, and a child had been up the rolling ladder behind the tall shelf, holding her breath, learning my own trick of stillness, and carrying every word away unspilled. I would have one move. When I made it, it would have to take the whole board at once, because Havern would never give me a second. That meant the Queen. It meant going over the head of the entire household, over the Lord Chamberlain, over the steward, over every careful courtier who would want the matter handled quietly, investigated discreetly, given to Master Havern himself to look into. God help us all, and putting it straight in front of Queen Saralind, with the child's testimony and the paper in my hand, and asking her to do the one thing that would freeze the board before Havern could move a piece. A lockdown, the sealing of the household. No one in or out, no door to the counting house opened, no paper moved, no trunk carried, until the Crown's own people had been through every ledger Eldred Havern had ever touched. It was an enormous thing to ask. A palace lockdown is not a small inconvenience, it is a public alarm. It tells the whole court, the whole city beyond the gates, that something is gravely wrong inside the House of Harrowgate. If I was right, it would catch a thief in the act of being trusted. If I was wrong, if the child had misheard, if the paper was innocent, if Havern folded his hands and explained it all away, then I, Corwin Vael, would be the sergeant who panicked the Crown on the word of an 8-year-old and the contents of a wastebasket, and I would end my 19 years of service in a single afternoon. And worse, far worse, I would have taught the whole palace that the Princess Maelin was a child who imagined things and cried wolf, and the next time she saw something true, no one at all would believe her. I would not be ruining only myself. I would be ruining her, and her gift, the gift of seeing what grown men overlook, the very thing that had brought her to me. So you understand the weight of it. I was not gambling my career. I was gambling her future as a person who could be believed. And I made the decision to gamble it, standing at my post with my eyes forward and my face like stone, because I had looked into her face when she said, "I think nobody will believe me," and I had decided that one person in that palace was going to believe her, and that one person was going to be enough. The clock ground on. At the change of the watch, when Guardsman Hollies came to relieve me, I did the small natural things a man does at the end of his watch. I stretched. I spoke a word about the cold. I made myself entirely ordinary. And then I walked at an unhurried pace, not toward the archive, not toward the green stair, but toward the guardroom, where Corporal Bran Adler was asleep. I woke him with a hand on his shoulder and a finger to my lips, and when his eyes opened and found my face, whatever he saw there sat him up at once, fully awake, reaching for his boots before I had said a word. We had served together for 11 years. He knew my faces the way I knew the princess's. "Trouble," he said, "not a question." "The worst kind," I said, "the quiet kind." "I need you to do exactly as I say and ask me your questions after, because we are short of time, and I am not yet certain how short." "Tell me." So I told him. I told him quickly and completely, because Bran was not a man you protected by keeping him in the dark. He was a man you armed by telling him everything. I watched his face go still as I spoke, the same stillness I had felt come over my own, and when I had finished he was quiet for the space of 3 breaths, and then he said the thing that told me I had chosen the right man. "The clerk," he said. "Wren, the young one who looks like he hasn't slept since autumn. If Havern is setting him up to take the fall, then Wren is in more danger than the books are. A man who plans to blame an honest clerk needs that clerk discredited, not vanished, but if anything goes wrong, if Havern smells trouble before we move, The cleanest way to bury the whole matter is to make sure the only honest man in the counting house is the one who can't speak for himself. He looked at me. We need to get to Wren, and we need to make sure nothing happens to him between now and the moment the Queen seals the house. I had been thinking of the paper and the books and the lockdown. I had been thinking of evidence. Bran, God keep him, had thought first of the man, and he was right, and the rightness of it went through me like cold water because it meant the danger was not only to the truth, it was to a living person. And it meant I had even less time than I had feared. We made our plan in the guardroom in the space of a few minutes, and it was the plan of two men who knew that they were short of everything except the will to do the thing correctly. Bran would go for the paper, because Bran off watch wandering the old wing was a guardsman stretching his legs, while Vael off watch walking the same path was a sergeant with a purpose. He would go quietly to the small archive off the green stair, and he would retrieve the single sheet from under the table with the brass lions, and he would touch nothing else and disturb nothing else, so that if the matter ever came before a magistrate, no man could say the evidence had been handled. He would bring it straight to me, and he would tell no one, and he would behave for all the world like a man who had gone to fetch a forgotten glove. I would go to find a way to the Queen. That was the harder road, because a sergeant of the household foot does not simply walk up to his sovereign and ask for an audience. There are doors and there are men who keep the doors, and the men who keep the doors are precisely the careful courtiers who would want this whole matter handled quietly, which is to say handed to Master Havern, which is to say buried. I would have to find a path to Queen Maelin that did not pass through the household's careful machinery, and I would have to find it fast. And there was the clerk, Tobias Wren. We agreed that for the moment we could do nothing direct for him without raising exactly the alarm we needed to avoid. But Bran, on his way to the archive, would pass the door of the counting house, and he would mark whether the young man was there, and in what state, and whether Havern was with him. Information first. The rescue, if a rescue was needed, would have to wait for the lockdown, when the whole house would freeze at once, and there would be no quiet corner left in which a thing could be done to a man. We parted at the guardroom door. Bran went left, toward the green stair, his hands easy and his step unhurried, every inch the off-duty man. I went right, toward the warren of corridors that led to the Queen's side of the palace, and I had not gone 50 paces before the whole careful plan began to come apart, because at the head of the corridor, blocking my path with his hands folded in front of him in that particular patient way of his, stood Master Eldred Havern. I have stood my post under a great many eyes, and I have learned to give nothing away, but I will not pretend my heart did not stop. He was not supposed to be there. He had no business in that corridor. It led to the Queen's apartments and to nothing else, and the keeper of the Privy Purse had no reason to be standing at the mouth of it at that hour, unless, and the thought went through me like a blade, unless he too was trying to reach the Queen and had got there first. "Sergeant Vael," he said pleasantly. His voice was dry and precise, every word a small coin set down on a counter. "You are off your watch, I think. You look like a man with somewhere to be." "Master Havern," I said, and gave him the small bow that his office was due, and not a flicker more than that. "Stretching my legs, sir. The long gallery is a cold post in winter. A man's blood needs moving after 6 hours of standing." He looked at me with mild, courteous interest, and I could not tell, I genuinely could not tell, whether there was anything behind the mildness, or whether it was only a man making the small talk of the corridor. That was his great gift, I understood then. He had spent 30 years being exactly as inscrutable as a guardsman, and he had been doing it longer than I had. We were, the two of us, the same kind of animal. We both knew how to wear a face. The difference was that I wore mine to keep an honest watch, and he wore his to keep a thief safe inside a trusted man. "The cold," he agreed. "Yes, hard on the old bones. I find myself walking the corridors a good deal these days when the figures will not come out." He smiled, dry as paper. "The Lammas accounts. A tedious business this time of year, so much to reconcile before the spring audit. I kept my face entirely still, but inside something dropped away. The Lammas figures will not survive a true audit, but there will be no true audit because I am the one who orders them. He had said the very word to the child, and now he stood in front of me and used it himself, easily as small talk, the Lammas accounts, the spring audit, and I understood that he was not testing me. He could not be. He had no reason to suspect a sergeant of the household foot of anything at all. He was simply a man so confident in his fortress of trust that he could speak the name of his own crime aloud in a corridor and feel nothing, because no one in 30 years had ever thought to listen. The very arrogance of it told me how deep the rot went. A frightened thief whispers. This man discussed his theft as weather. "I'm sure it'll come right, sir," I said. "It always seems to in your hands." Something moved at the back of his eyes then. Pleasure, I think. The small, warm pleasure a vain man takes in being told he is indispensable. It is the one weakness such men cannot govern. They have built their whole lives on being trusted, and they cannot resist the music of it, even from a sergeant in a cold corridor. "It does," he said softly. "It always has." He inclined his head, the gracious dismissal of a great man to a small one, and stepped aside to let me pass. "Walk well, Sergeant. Mind the cold." I walked past him. It took everything I had to walk past him at an ordinary pace, neither slowing nor hurrying, to give my back to the man I now knew for certain was a thief, and to feel his mild eyes on me until I turned the corner. And the moment I was out of his sight, I stopped with my back to the cold stone, and I did the arithmetic again, faster now, because the board had changed. He had been coming from the direction of the Queen's apartments, not going toward them, coming away, which meant he had already been to see the Queen or her people that afternoon, which meant whatever he had said to her, he had said before the child ever climbed down from the rolling ladder. I did not know what he had said, but I knew, with the cold certainty of a man who has watched courtiers work for 19 years, that a clever thief who senses the faintest tremor in his fortress does not wait to be accused. He accuses first. He goes to the trusting sovereign and he says, with his hands folded and his voice full of regret, "I am afraid I must bring you a painful matter. The new clerk, Wren, I have found discrepancies. I fear the young man is not what he seems." He was laying the ground. Whether he had smelled trouble or whether he was simply running his plan to its schedule, I could not know. But Eldred Havern had been to the Queen, and the seed he had planted there was that the honest man was the thief. And I was about to walk into that same room and tell her the opposite, with nothing but a child's word and a paper I did not yet hold in my hand. The door to the Queen's apartments was kept that afternoon by a man I knew, an old guardsman named Pelham, who had stood the inner posts as long as I had and whose judgment I trusted. I had counted on him, in a vague way, to get me through the first door. I had not counted on what he told me when I reached him. "Corwin," he looked at me sidelong, low-voiced, the way one old watchman speaks to another. "You're off your watch. What brings you to the Queen's door at this hour?" "I need to see her," I said, "tonight." "It cannot wait, and it cannot go through the Chamberlain. Can you get me word in?" Pelham's face did something I did not like. He hesitated, and a man like Pelham does not hesitate. "It's a strange evening for it," he said slowly. "Master Havern was just with her, came out not a quarter hour past, looking grave as a churchyard, and before he went in, he told the Chamberlain's man that he had a heavy duty to perform and begged the Queen's private ear. Whatever he said in there, Pelham shook his head. She came to the door after herself, which she never does, and she gave an order. She said the young clerk, Wren, the harbor lad, was to be kept to his quarters and not permitted near the counting-house until a matter had been looked into. Quiet, she said. No fuss. But firm. He looked at me. It's already happening, Corwin, whatever it is. Havern's accused the boy of something, and the Queen's half believed him because why wouldn't she? 30 years. There it was. The trap had sprung before I ever reached the door. Havern had moved first. exactly as I had feared, and now the honest man was confined to his quarters under a cloud. The books were entirely in the thief's hands, and the Queen's mind had been salted with a lie before I could plant a single seed of truth in it. I had walked into the audience already losing. I made the decision in the space of a breath, the way you make decisions when there is no good one. I would not wait for permission. I would not go through the chamberlain or the careful machinery. I would ask this old comrade to do a hard thing. Pelham, I said, I am going to tell you something, and then I am going to ask you to take a risk, and you may refuse me. And if you refuse me, I will think no less of you, because what I am asking is against every standing order we both serve. But I need you to get me in front of the Queen tonight before Havern's lie has time to set, and I need it badly enough that I am willing to stake my service on it. The clerk is not the thief. Havern is. And the only witness is the Princess Maelin, and she is 8 years old. And if I do not get to the Queen tonight, the books will be gone by morning and the boy will hang for the keeper's crimes. And a child who told the truth will spend the rest of her life being told she imagined it. Pelham looked at me for a long moment. I have wondered since what would have become of all of us if he had been a different sort of man, a careful man, a man who covered himself. The whole thing turned on him in that corridor, and he never knew how close it came. The princess, he said at last, she saw it. Heard it word for word, and there's a paper, Bran's fetching it now. He breathed out slowly. If you're wrong, Corwin, they'll break you. Me too, for bringing you. I know it. And if you're right and I turn you away and that boy hangs and the thief walks, he did not finish it. He turned instead and put his hand on the door and said over his shoulder in the flat voice of a man who has chosen his side and will not discuss it further, "Wait here. Say nothing to anyone. I'll see if the Queen will hear an old sergeant out of his depth." And he went in. I waited in that cold corridor for what felt like an age, and was probably the length of 3 Hail Marys. I have stood many hard watches, but I do not know that I have ever stood a harder few minutes than those, with everything I had wagered hanging on whether a tired Queen, already troubled by a trusted man's grave news, would consent to hear a contradictory tale from a sergeant who had no business at her door. I thought of the child, somewhere in the palace, being a perfectly ordinary princess, waiting for the word I had promised to send. I thought of the boy Wren, alone in his quarters, not yet knowing that the noose had begun to tighten. I thought of Bran, somewhere in the old wing, reaching under a table with brass lions on its feet, and I prayed, I am not an especially praying man, but I prayed that the paper was still there, and that it was everything we needed it to be. The door opened. Pelham's face told me nothing, which was its own kind of answer. "She'll see you," he said quietly. 5 minutes. The prince consort is with her. And Corwin, he caught my arm as I passed, she has not sent for Havern back, which means she has not decided. You have not lost yet. But the Lady Brienne is also with her, and the Lady Brienne thinks the world of Master Havern, so guard your tongue and bring your evidence plain. Go. I went in. The Queen's private sitting room was warm and low-lit, and smaller than people imagine, with a good fire and worn furniture that had been chosen for comfort rather than show. Queen Maelin sat by the fire with a shawl about her shoulders and a closed book in her lap, and she looked tired, the particular tiredness of a ruler who has just been handed a painful duty. The Prince Consort Aldrich stood at her shoulder, a tall, gentle man with ink on his fingers and worry on his brow. And by the window, half in shadow, stood the Lady Brienne, the senior of the Queen's ladies, a handsome, composed woman who had been kind to me in small ways for years and who was, I knew, devoted to Master Havern. Pelham had been right to warn me. This was not a friendly room. It was a fair one, which is harder. "Sergeant Vael," the Queen said. Her voice was even and unhurried, the voice she used to give a clever courtier nothing to stand on. "Pelham tells me you have come on a matter that will not wait and will not go through my chamberlain. That is an irregular thing for a sergeant of my household foot to do. I have known you a long while, and I have never known you to be irregular, so I will hear you." But I will tell you plainly before you begin, that I have this very hour been brought a grave matter touching the honesty of my counting house, by a man whose service I have trusted for 30 years, and I am not in a humor to be brought a second grave matter by a man who has not slept. Speak carefully, Sergeant, speak true, and do not waste my evening. I understood then the full size of the cliff I was standing on. She had already heard Havern. She believed him, or near enough. And the first words out of my mouth had to be strong enough to crack 30 years of trust, or I would lose her in the opening breath. I could not lead with the child. She would hear children imagine things and the door would close. I could not lead with the paper. I did not have it yet. I had to lead with the one thing that even a tired, half-persuaded queen could not dismiss. And as I drew my breath to speak, I understood that the one thing I had was the words, the exact words. The Lammas figures will not survive a true audit, but there will be no true audit, because I am the one who orders them. A child of 8 could not have invented that sentence, and if I could make the Queen feel the impossibility of its invention, the whole thing might turn. Your Majesty, I said, I will not waste a word. This afternoon, a witness overheard Master Eldred Havern, alone in the small archive with a second man, say the following, which I will give you exactly as it was given to me. He said, "The Lammas figures will not survive a true audit, but there will be no true audit because I am the one who orders them." And when the second man asked about the new clerk, the honest one, Master Havern said, "The honest ones are easily managed. You give them more work than they can finish, and then you blame them when something is wrong. By the spring he will have resigned in disgrace, and no one will ever look at his books, because they will have already decided he is the fool who lost the count." The room went absolutely still. I had been watching the Queen's face, and I saw the words land one by one, and I saw, this is the thing I had staked everything on, I saw her recognize the shape of them. Because she had, that very hour, been told that the honest new clerk was a thief whose books should not be trusted. And here in front of her, a sergeant repeated a sentence in which the trusted man arranged in advance for the honest clerk to be blamed. The two stories did not merely conflict. The second explained the first. It explained it completely, and I watched her see that. The Lady Brienne spoke first before the Queen could. "And who is this witness, Sergeant?" Her voice was cool and reasonable and not unkind, which made it more dangerous. "A man overheard in a locked archive saying such damning things by whom? Where is this witness? Why does he not come himself? Forgive me, Your Majesty, but it is a very serious charge against a very good man, founded on a voice we cannot see." It was the right question. It was exactly the question a fair person should ask, and I had no good way to answer it because the answer was a child, and the moment I said so, the whole room would relax back into its comfortable certainty. Oh, a child, well, children hear things. But the Queen was watching me, and she was no fool, and she had caught the one thing the Lady Brienne had not. "Sergeant Vael does not name the witness," she said slowly, "which tells me the witness is someone he is protecting. And a man does not protect a witness who is an adult of standing, for such a witness protects himself by his own weight. He protects a witness who is vulnerable, who would not be believed." Her gray eyes did not leave my face. "Sergeant, who heard these words?" There was no avoiding it now. I had hoped to bring the paper first, to lay one hard fact on the table before I asked her to believe a child. But the moment had come early, as the hard moments always do, and I have learned that when the truth must be spoken there is nothing to be gained by dressing it. So I spoke it plain. "Your daughter, Majesty," I said, "the Princess Maelin. She was up the rolling ladder in the small archive reading when Master Havern came in believing the room empty. She held her breath and kept still and was not seen, and she carried every word away unspilled. And she has told 3 grown people in this palace today, and every one of them sent her away and told her she was imagining things. I am the 4th, and I believe her, and I have staked my service on it, because in 19 years at the inner posts I have learned to tell a child who is telling the truth from a child who is not, and that child is telling the truth. I had braced for the room to close. I had braced for the soft dismissals. Poor little Maelin. She has such an imagination. You know how she dotes on the guards. And the Lady Brienne did begin to say something of the kind, her face arranging itself into gentle pity, and I felt the whole case begin to slip away from me toward that warm, fatal place where children are loved and not believed. But the Prince Consort Aldrich, who had said nothing the whole while, who had stood at his wife's shoulder with his inky fingers and his worried brow, spoke now, very quietly, and stopped the room. "My daughter," he said, "does not know what an audit is." Everyone looked at him. "She is 8, he went on, in the mild, precise voice of a scholar laying out a small certain fact. "I teach her myself. She reads beautifully and she has a memory like a steel trap and she sees a great deal, more than is comfortable sometimes, but she does not know the word audit. She does not know what the Lammas figures are. She does not know that an honest man can be ruined by being given too much work and then blamed for failing it. These are not things a child of 8 has any way to invent, because they are not in a child's world. If she repeated these words, he looked at the Queen, and something passed between them that had 30 years of marriage in it. Then she did not make them up. She cannot have made them up. She can only have heard them. And the question before us, Saralind, is not whether to believe a child's fancy. It is why our trusted keeper of the Privy Purse was saying, in a locked room, the exact words our daughter could not have invented. The silence after that was a different silence. The Lady Brienne's gentle pity had nowhere to go. The Queen sat very still by her fire, and I watched the thing turn, watched 30 years of trust crack, not loudly, but cleanly, along the one line of stress that the Prince Consort had found. A child cannot invent the vocabulary of a crime she has no way to know. "Bring me my daughter," the Queen said at last, and her voice had changed. It was no longer tired. It was the voice of a sovereign who has decided to find the bottom of a thing. Quietly. "And Sergeant Vael," she turned to me, "you spoke of a paper. To Pelham in the corridor. He reported it to me before he let you in." "What paper?" And as if the word itself had summoned him, there came a knock at the outer door, Pelham's knock, the 3-and-1 we used between the old hands, and Pelham put his head in and said, "Forgive me, Majesty. Corporal Adler is here. He says the sergeant is expecting him, and that what he carries cannot wait." And the Queen said, "Let him come." And Bran Adler came into the warm, low room with snow still melting on his shoulders and his face set hard, and in his gloved hands, held flat between 2 clean sheets of blotting board so that no thumb had touched its face, was a single sheet of paper. "Majesty." He bowed as well as a man can bow with both hands full, and laid the thing carefully on the low table by the fire, sliding the top board away so the page lay face up in the firelight. "I retrieved this from beneath a table in the small archive off the green stair, where the sergeant told me it would be. I touched only the edges. I disturbed nothing else in the room. I came straight here. No one saw me but Pelham." He hesitated then, and I knew Bran well enough to know the hesitation meant there was more, and that the more was not good. "Majesty, Sergeant, there is a thing I should report because it bears on the time we have. As I came back along the upper corridor, I passed the door of the counting-house. The lamps were lit in there, late as it is. And I heard Master Havern's voice through the door, and a second voice answering, a clerk's voice, low and frightened. I did not stop. A guardsman who stops at a door is a guardsman who is remembered. But I heard enough as I passed to know that Master Havern was speaking to the young clerk, Wren, and that he was speaking gently, the way a man speaks who is being kind, and that what he was saying, under the kindness, was that the figures had come out wrong again, and that it grieved him, and that he feared he could no longer protect the young man from the consequences much longer, and that perhaps it would be better for Wren's own sake to make a clean breast of his mistakes before the spring audit found them, and resign quietly with such reference as a kind master could still give. Bran's jaw was tight. "He is doing it now, Majesty. Tonight. He is sitting with that frightened boy, and he is walking him kindly, step by gentle step, toward signing his own ruin. By the morning he means to have a resignation in the young man's own hand, confessing to mistakes he never made. And once he has that, the whole scheme is sealed. The honest man will have confessed, and no one will ever look past the confession to the books. The room went cold at that, colder than the winter outside. I had understood in the abstract that Havern meant to ruin the clerk. To hear that he was doing it that very hour in the next wing, with soft words and a kind face, while we sat over a single sheet of paper deciding whether to believe a child, it changed the shape of the night entirely. It was no longer a question of whether we would move. It was a question of whether we would move in time, before a frightened young man, ground down for 2 months and now offered a gentle exit by the only man who had ever seemed to care for him, put his name to the lie that would hang him and bury the truth in the same stroke. "Then we have not got hours," the Queen said. "We have got minutes. But before I move on it, Sergeant, I will see what this paper is, because a queen does not seal her house and send for a frightened boy in the dark on the strength of a thing she has not yet looked at with her own eyes. Show me." And she bent to the table, and the urgency of Wren she held in her hand like a drawn breath, to be loose the instant the paper had told her what she needed to know. We all leaned in to look at it, the Queen and the Prince Consort and the Lady Brienne and I, 4 heads bent over a single sheet of paper in the light of a fire, and at first it looked like nothing. It looked like a leaf of accounts, a column of figures down one side in a neat clerkly hand, a line of writing across the bottom, a red wax seal broken in the corner, the dull furniture of the counting-house, nothing to it. And then the Prince Consort, who had a scholar's eye for the marks men make on paper, made a small sound in his throat. "Look," he said, and he did not touch it, only pointed, his inky finger hovering above the page. "The figures are in one hand. See, the same clerk's hand all the way down the column, even and tired and careful. That will be young Wren's hand. I have seen his fair copies. But the line at the bottom, the line that changes the total, that is in another hand entirely, heavier, older, and see how the ink sits differently on the page. It is a later ink, added after the column was dry. Someone took an honest clerk's column of figures and wrote a false total under it in a different hand, and then his finger moved to the broken seal, and then sealed it as authorized, with the keeper's own seal, to make the false total the official one. The clerk did the honest work. Another hand falsified it, and the seal that made the lie official is the keeper's." "And there is more," I said, because I had been looking at the writing at the bottom, and a cold understanding was building in me. "Your Majesty, may I will not touch it, but look at the line itself. Look at the name it is made out to." They looked. The false total, a great sum, far greater than the honest column above it warranted, was made payable, the bottom line said, to the account of the Eldermore Relief of the Coast, the Crown's own charity, the fund that fed the harbor towns through the hard winters and rebuilt the fishing villages after the storms. It was the most blameless line of writing imaginable. A great sum, going to feed the poor of the coast. No auditor in the realm would question a payment to the relief of the coast. It was beyond suspicion. It was the perfect place to send money you meant to steal. "Is not stealing from the Crown," I said slowly, and I felt the floor of the whole matter drop away beneath me as I said it, because the thing was so much larger and so much worse than a man with his hand in the till. "Or not only. He is stealing through the relief of the coast. He inflates the figure. He seals it as a charitable payment that no one will ever question. The money leaves the treasury bound for the poor of the harbor towns, and somewhere between the treasury and the coast, it goes elsewhere. To the man in the green coat with the gold collar, perhaps. Master Havern does not need to hide a theft. He has built a theft that looks like charity, and the more he steals, the more it looks like the Crown is generous to its poor." The Queen had gone very pale. "The relief of the coast," she said quietly, "is the dearest work of my reign. I founded it. I have given it my own name's protection. If the figures of the relief are false," she stopped. I watched her follow the thought to its end, the way I had followed it to mine, and arrive at the same dreadful place. Then it is not one corrupt payment. It is years of them. He has been hiding behind the one fund no one would ever audit, because to audit it would be to question the Crown's own charity. He has used my mercy as his cover. Her hand closed slowly on the arm of her chair. How long, Sergeant? How much? I do not know, Majesty, I said honestly, but I would wager it is not a season's worth. A man does not build a scheme this careful for one winter. And there is a second man, the one in the green coat with the gold collar of the Treasury House, which means this is not Eldred Havern alone. It is Eldred Havern and at least one man inside the Treasury, working together, the one falsifying the order and the other receiving the money. And if there are two, there may be more. The clerk Wren is the only honest man we know of in the whole chain, and he is the one being set up to take the blame for all of it. I drew a breath. Majesty, this is bigger than a thief. This is a ring, and it has had years to grow inside the one fund you would never think to look at. And the moment Master Havern learns he has been seen, every page of evidence in that counting house and that treasury house will be in the fire before morning. We do not have days. We have hours, perhaps less. The Lady Brienne had not spoken in some while. When I glanced at her, I saw that the gentle pity was entirely gone from her face, and something else had taken its place, a kind of stricken realization, the look of a person who has just understood that they have spent years vouching, in perfect good faith, for a man who is not at all what they believed. I told the princess she had dreamed it, she said, very low to no one. This afternoon. She came to me white as milk, and I laughed, and I told her Master Havern was the kindest man in the palace, and I sent her away. She looked up at the Queen, and there was real anguish in it. Majesty, I have called him friend for 20 years. If I had listened to a child, instead of laughing at her. You did what every grown soul in this palace did, including me, an hour ago, the Queen said, not unkindly, and she rose from her chair. And when she rose, the tiredness was wholly gone from her, and the Queen was in the room, the whole weight of her, and I understood that the thing had turned all the way over and that we were no longer pleading a case. We were planning a campaign. We trusted the floor not to give way. Well, the floor has given way. Sergeant Vael. She turned to me. You said hours. Tell me precisely what you need, and you shall have it, and we will move tonight, before that man can burn a single page. And someone Pelham go now, quietly, and bring me my daughter. I find I have a great deal to say to her, and a great deal to ask, and an apology to begin with. I laid it out for her the way Bran and I had begun to lay it out in the guardroom, only now with the whole weight of the crown behind it, instead of 2 off-watch guardsmen and their nerve. 3 things, Majesty, and all 3 at once, or none of them, I said. First, the counting house. The evidence is in those ledgers, and the moment Havern knows we are moving, the ledgers go in the fire. We must seal that room before he can reach it, and seal it with men he cannot turn, your own household foot, not the household clerks. Second, the man himself. He must be taken before he can send a word to his confederate in the Treasury, because if either of them gets free for an hour, the half of the evidence we cannot reach tonight, the receiving end, in the Treasury House across the city, will be ash by dawn. Third, the clerk. Tobias Wren is confined to his quarters under suspicion, and he is the one man whose ruin this whole scheme depends upon, which makes him the one man it would be most convenient to silence. He must be put under our protection at once, not as a suspect, as a witness. And he must be made to understand he is safe, because a frightened innocent who thinks the whole palace believes him a thief may do something desperate before morning, and we need him whole, and we need him talking. A lockdown, the Queen said. That is what you are describing, the sealing of the household. It is, Majesty, and I will not pretend it is a small thing. The whole court will know by morning that the House of Harrowgate barred its own gates in the night. The city will know. There will be talk, and the talk will be ugly, and if I am wrong about any part of this, the talk will be about a queen who sealed her palace on the word of a sergeant and a child. I am asking you to spend your good name on this. I would not ask it if I saw another road. I do not see another road." She looked at me for a long moment, and then she looked at the paper on the table, the honest column and the false total and the keeper's seal pressed into the lie, and then she looked at the door, beyond which her daughter was even now being brought, the daughter 3 grown people had told to stop imagining things. "My good name," she said quietly, "is not worth more than the truth, Sergeant, or it is worth nothing at all. And a queen who will not spend it to protect an honest man and a brave child is a queen who has misunderstood what the name is for." She turned, and her voice changed again, and now it was all command. "Corporal Adler, you will go to the captain of the household foot, wake him, my authority, and you will tell him the queen orders the household sealed this hour on her own word, no questions to be answered to anyone below the captain himself. The counting house is to be closed and held by household foot, the doors not to be open to any person, not the keeper of the Privy Purse, not the Lord Chamberlain, not any officer of the Treasury, on pain of the Queen's grave displeasure. Nothing leaves that room. Nothing is carried out of this palace tonight, no trunk, no case, no letter, no rider. Do you have it?" To the letter, Majesty, Bran was already moving. Pelham the clerk ran, and not gently for the speed of it, only for the manner. "Go yourself, take 2 men you trust, and you remember what the corporal heard at that door. Master Havern is with the boy this very hour, walking him kindly toward signing his own ruin. Get between that young man and that pen before the ink is dry. Tell him on the way that the Queen knows he is no thief, and that he is under her protection now, and bring him here. If Havern objects to your taking his clerk, you tell Master Havern that the Queen has need of the young man, and you do not answer one further question. Go." Pelham was gone before she finished. "Sergeant Vael," she turned back to me, "you and I will deal with Master Havern. You found this thing, you will see it through. But understand me, there will be no rough handling and no irregularity, because this man will have lawyers and friends and 30 years of good repute. And the moment we give him one true grievance, one door wrongly broken, one word wrongly spoken, he will hide his guilt behind our error. We will take him correctly in front of witnesses by the Crown's lawful authority, and we will give him not 1 inch of ground to stand on. Discipline, Sergeant. The same discipline that kept you standing at your post all afternoon while you carried this. It is what will hang him. I have served the House of Harrowgate my whole life, and I have loved it the way a man loves a hard thing he has given himself to, and I had never been prouder to wear its colors than in that moment, hearing the Queen choose the lawful slow road over the fast satisfying one, because she understood, as I understood, that a thief is only truly beaten when he is beaten cleanly. Pelham reached the boy in time, though it was a near thing, and I had it from him afterward. He came into the counting house without knocking, which is a thing that is not done, and found Master Havern seated close beside the young clerk with a paper between them and a pen already inked in Wren's shaking hand, and the boy bent over it, gray and broken, on the very edge of writing the first letter of his name. And Pelham, God keep him, did the simplest and rightest thing. He said, loud and flat and final, "Master Wren, the Queen requires you. Now." And the spell of that quiet room, the kind voice and the gentle ruin, broke on those few hard words like ice underfoot, and the boy looked up, and the pen came away from the paper, and Havern Pelham said Havern's courteous face did not so much as flicker, but his hand moved just slightly toward the unsigned page, as if to draw it back and keep it, and Pelham set his own broad hand flat on the table over it and said, "And the Queen will see that paper too, Master Havern, just as it lies." And so the confession was never signed, and the page that was meant to hang an innocent man went instead into the Crown's evidence blank, but for the date and the false charges Havern had drafted at the top of it in his own dry hand. One more thing he had written that he had not meant for any eye, but the one he was deceiving. And then the door opened, and Pelham stood aside, and the Princess Maelin came in. She had been being a perfectly ordinary princess. I could see she had been trying very hard at it. But the sight of the warm room full of grave faces, and her mother and father both turned toward her, and a sergeant and a corporal of the guard, and a paper laid out on the low table in the firelight. She stopped just inside the door, and her small face went uncertain, and I saw her brace for it, the thing she had braced for all afternoon, the gentle voice that would tell her she had been imagining things. The Queen crossed the room to her, and knelt down on the worn carpet so that her eyes were level with her daughter's, which I do not think I had ever seen a sovereign do, and took both the child's hands in hers. "Maelin," she said, "I am told that 3 times today you tried to tell grown people something true and important, and 3 times they would not listen to you. I am told one of those people was the Lady Brienne, and I am very sorry for it, and she is sorry too. And I am told the only person in this whole palace who believed you was Sergeant Vael." She glanced up at me and back to her daughter. "I want you to know that you were right, my darling, about all of it, and that you were braver than anyone in this room, and that what you did today may save a great many people you will never meet. And I want to say something to you that grown people do not say to children nearly often enough, and that I am ashamed I did not say to you the moment you were born, which is this: I believe you. Now, will you tell me, exactly as you told the sergeant, leaving nothing out and adding nothing, what you heard?" And the Princess Maelin, 8 years old, who had been disbelieved by every grown soul she had trusted, looked into her mother's face and found it open, and I watched the same relief land on her that had landed when I told her I believed her in the cold gallery, only larger now and steadier, because it was her own mother, the Queen, kneeling on the carpet to listen. And she took a breath and she told it, word for word, the same words in the same order unspilled. And when she came to the part about the honest clerk who would be blamed, her voice did not waver, and I saw the Queen's face harden into something I would not have wanted turned on me, and I thought, it is done. Whatever happens now, the child has been heard, and the crown is moving, and Eldred Havern is a dead man walking who does not yet know it. I should have known better than to think it was done. It is never done until it is done. And Eldred Havern at that very hour was already a step ahead of all of us. The lockdown of a great house is a strange and solemn thing to witness from the inside. It does not happen with shouting. It happens with a quiet word passed from the captain to the sergeants and from the sergeants to the men, and then, all at once, the household stops being a place people pass through and becomes a place that holds them. Doors that stood open all day are closed and manned. The gate to the outer court is barred, and a pair of the household foot stand before it, and the porter who tries to let out the night's last tradesman is told, courteously and immovably, that no one leaves the palace tonight by the Queen's order. The kitchens go still. The corridors fill with the soft sound of boots taking up posts, and over the whole vast building there settles a particular hush, the hush of a place that knows something is happening and does not yet know what. I felt that hush in my own chest as much as in the corridors, and I will be honest about what was in me while I moved through it, because a man who tells only the brave part of a story tells a lie by leaving things out. I was afraid. Not for my body, there is no fear of the body in a counting house, but for the wager I had made, which was larger than any I had laid in 19 years. Standing my post all those years, I had taught myself that stillness is safety. The man who does not move cannot put a foot wrong, but I had moved now. I had broken the careful machinery, gone over the heads of my betters, staked my service and an old comrade's, and far worse, a child's whole standing as a person who could be believed, on a story I could not yet prove. If I was wrong about any single link, if the words had been misheard, if the paper meant something innocent, if Havern folded his hands and explained it all away, every one of those wagers came due at once, and I would have spent them all on nothing. That is the cost the stillness hides. The world thinks the hard thing about a guardsman's life is the standing. It is not. The standing is easy. The hard thing is the one rare night when standing is the wrong thing, when duty stops being the holding of a post and becomes the leaving of it, and a man must know the difference in his own bones and bet everything on his knowing. I had bet everything. And now, walking through the sealed and silent house I had set in motion, I had to live in the long, cold minutes between the bet and the turning of the card, which is the loneliest place a man can stand, and I stood in it the only way I knew how, which was to put one boot in front of the other and trust the child, and trust my 19 years, and not let my face show the rest. I went with the captain and a file of 6 men to the counting house, because that was the prize, and the Queen had been right that it must be held by men who could not be turned. We came up the great stair, and along the corridor toward the seal room and the offices of the household, and I felt my heart climbing as we went, because the one fear I had not been able to put down was that we would arrive too late, that Havern, by some instinct, by some word carried wrong, by the simple animal sense that all such men seem to have for danger, would already be there, already at the fire. The door of the counting house stood open. Light spilled out of it into the dim corridor. And inside, with his back to us, bent over the great hearth where a fire had been built up far higher than any clerk's room needed on even the coldest night, was Eldred Havern. He was burning the books. I have seen many things at my post, but I do not think I will forget the sight of that dry, courteous man, his white hair lit orange by the flames, feeding the bound ledgers of the realm's accounts into the fire one careful page at a time. He was not panicking. That was the worst of it. He was methodical. He had the order books open on the table beside him, and he was tearing out the particular pages. Not all of them, only the ones that mattered, the ones that told the tale, and laying them into the fire and watching them blacken and curl, with the patient attention of a man who has done difficult work all his life and means to do this last piece of it well. "Master Havern," the captain said from the doorway, "step away from the fire. By the Queen's order this room is sealed." Havern did not start. He did not even turn at first. He laid one more page into the flames and watched it take, and then he straightened slowly and turned to face us, brushing a fleck of ash from his sleeve, and his face was perfectly composed, perfectly courteous, the face of a man who has been interrupted at his correspondence. "Captain," he said, "Sergeant Vael, and the Queen's order no less. My, the household sealed in the dead of night. May I ask what crisis has so disturbed Her Majesty's rest?" His eyes moved over us, counting us, measuring, and I watched him do the arithmetic the way I had done mine all afternoon, and I watched him understand in perhaps 2 seconds exactly how much we knew and exactly how little of the evidence remained for us to hold it with. Because he had been burning for some minutes. And what was left of the ledgers, what we could see, the half-consumed pages curling in the grate, the gutted books open on the table, was no longer the clean, damning record it had been an hour ago. He had ruined it. We had come, and we had come within minutes, and we were still too late by exactly those minutes, and he knew it, and the knowing settled over his courteous face like a kind of peace. "Step away from the fire, sir," I said, and I crossed the room, and I took up a position between Eldred Havern and the hearth, not roughly, not touching him, simply standing where he could no longer reach the flames, and I looked at what was left in the grate, and my heart went down into my boots. The pages were gone, most of them. The order book for the relief of the coast, the book that would have shown years of false totals each sealed as charity, lay on the table with a third of its leaves torn out and the rest scorched at the edges where he had begun to feed the whole of it in. He had not finished. We had stopped him before he finished, but he had destroyed enough. He had destroyed, I feared, exactly the pages that mattered. "You may stand wherever you like, Sergeant," Havern said pleasantly. "I have finished my business at the fire. I was tidying old papers, a keeper's eternal task. I confess I do not understand why the tidying of old accounts should require the sealing of the Queen's house, but then I am only a clerk, and the ways of the great are beyond me." He folded his hands. The composure of him was monstrous. "I wonder, Sergeant, whether someone has been telling Her Majesty stories. Children tell such stories. I am told the little princess had quite a turn this afternoon, feverish, the nurse said. Imagining all manner of things. I do hope she is recovering." And there it was, the thing I had feared from the very first, laid out now in the open, smooth as glass. He had heard. Somehow, in the hours between the corridor and now, he had heard that the child had a story, and he had understood exactly what story, and he had spent the time not in flight but in burning the only hard proof, so that when the crown came for him, there would be nothing left but the word of a feverish little girl and a sergeant who doted on her, against the spotless 30-year name of the keeper of the Privy Purse. He had not run because he did not need to run. He had cut the ground out from under us while we were still mustering our men, and now he stood in the wreckage of the evidence with his hands folded and dared us to prove a thing. The captain looked at me. I could see the question in his face and the doubt beginning, the terrible reasonable doubt. The books are burned, the proof is gone, and all we have is a child's word. Have we sealed the Queen's house and accused a great man on a tale we can no longer stand up? It was the false dawn turned inside out. We had moved fast and bravely and correctly, and we had still arrived a few minutes too late, and in those few minutes the careful thief had turned the whole board against us. The evidence was ash. The witness was 8 years old and could be called feverish. The clerk was a confined suspect whose word against the keepers would be laughed out of any court. And Eldred Havern stood in the firelight, calm as a stone, having lost nothing he could not afford to lose, watching me understand that he had beaten us, and very nearly in that moment he had. But I had not stood 19 years at the inner posts to be undone by a calm face. The whole art of my trade is to look at the room that is actually there, and I made myself stop looking at Havern, who wanted to be looked at, who was a master of being looked at, and I made myself look instead at the room around him, at the table, at the desk, at the small ordinary things a methodical man leaves behind when he is doing careful work in a hurry. A man burning papers in a fire writes nothing. But a man who, an hour before, had to write a great many false figures, who had to forge a total, copy a hand, draft an order for his confederate, such a man leaves traces, and the traces are not in the burned books. They are in the things around the writing. And there on the desk, where Havern had been working before we came, lay the furniture of a forger's labor. A pen, an inkwell, a stick of red sealing wax with the end newly melted, and my eye caught it and held it, a leaf of blotting paper, the soft pink kind a clerk presses over fresh ink to dry it, the kind that takes up the wet letters in reverse and holds them. Havern had burned the documents. He had not thought to burn the blotting paper. Why would he? It is the most ignorable thing on a desk, a scrap, a clerk's rag. But a sheet of blotting paper that has dried a forger's work holds the ghost of every wet line it ever pressed, backwards, faint, but there, the mirror of the thing itself. I did not lunge for it. I had learned that lesson in the corridor with Havern. Never let the clever man see what you have seen. I let my eyes move on, past the blotting paper as though it were nothing, and I said in a voice as mild as his own, "Captain, the Queen's order is that nothing leaves this room and nothing is moved. I would ask that the desk be left exactly as it stands, untouched, and a man set over it, until Her Majesty's own clerks can examine it. Master Havern is quite right that this is a matter for careful hands. Let us be careful." And I stepped back from the desk, casually, so that no eye in the room would think there was anything on it worth a second glance. Havern's face did not change, but something behind his eyes flickered, the first flicker I had seen, and I knew that he had followed my glance, that he had seen me see the blotting paper, and that he was now doing a new and far less comfortable piece of arithmetic. For the first time that night, the courteous calm had a crack in it, and he was working very hard to keep me from seeing the crack, just as I was working very hard to keep him from seeing that I had. "By all means," he said, "careful hands, though I cannot think what an old clerk's desk will tell anyone. Pens and ink, the tools of a tedious trade," he smiled. "But you must do as the Queen commands, Sergeant. We all must." We took him then correctly in front of witnesses, with no rough hand laid on him. The captain spoke the lawful words. 2 of the household foot stood at his shoulders, not touching him, only there, immovable. And Eldred Havern walked out of the counting-house between them with his head high and his hands folded, and his composure very nearly perfect. And only I, who had been watching faces for 19 years, saw the one thing he could not hide, which was that he glanced just once, just for an instant as he passed the desk, at the pink leaf of blotting paper. A man does not glance at a thing that means nothing to him. He glanced at it because he knew, now, that he had left the ghost of his crime lying in plain sight, and that the sergeant had seen it, and that the night was not over after all. When he was gone, and the door was held, and the desk was set under guard untouched, I let myself breathe, and I went to find the Queen, because the thing had turned again, and I needed her to know the whole of how it now stood, both the bad and the good. "The books are burned, Majesty," I told her plainly when I stood before her again, the child now wrapped in a blanket on a low stool by the fire and refusing to be sent to bed. "Most of them. He had some minutes before we reached him, and he used them well. The order book for the relief is gutted. The pages that name the false totals are ash. If we had only the books, I would tell you honestly that we might not be able to hang him. 30 years of good name against a child's word and a sergeant's." I drew a breath. But he made one mistake, the mistake all careful men make, which is that he was careful about the great things and careless about the small. He burned the documents. He left the blotting paper, and blotting paper holds in reverse the ghost of everything wet that was ever pressed to it. If your clerks read that leaf in a mirror, Majesty, I believe they will find the very figures he burned, the false total, the forged line, perhaps the name and direction of the man in the green coat, written backwards and faint but readable. The proof is not gone. It is only inside out. The Queen looked at me for a long moment, and then, for the first time that whole grim night, she smiled, a small fierce smile. "Inside out," she repeated, "like the man himself." And then her smile faded, and she said the thing that told me the campaign was only half won. "But the blotting paper, Sergeant, will name his crime and perhaps his confederate. It will not on its own catch the second man before he burns his own half of the record across the city. We hold Havern. We hold his desk. But the man in the green coat with the gold collar, the receiver in the Treasury House, is still out there in the dark, and the moment he hears the household was sealed and the keeper taken, he will know, and he will burn everything on his end, and then it will be one dead scheme half proved instead of a living ring brought whole to justice." She rose. "And there is one thread we have not pulled which troubles me. You said nothing leaves the palace tonight. Has anything tried to?" It was a Queen's question, and it was the right one, and it went through me like a draft from an open door, because I had been so wholly fixed on the books, and the man and the blotting paper that I had not stopped to ask the simplest watchman's question of all. In a house that has just been sealed, who is trying to get out? The answer came almost at once, carried up to us by a breathless young guardsman the captain had sent ahead. There was, he reported, a matter at the postern by the stable court, the small gate the household used for deliveries and for the comings and goings of the lower servants. A man had presented himself there not a quarter-hour past, asking to be let out, and finding the gate barred and manned by the Queen's order, had grown first indignant and then, when the guards held firm, oddly insistent, and had at last gone away from the gate, and the guardsman on the postern, being a careful lad, had not liked the look of him and had sent word up. The man, the lad said, had been a servant of the household, one of Master Havern's own people, his underclerk and errand man, a quiet fellow named Sorrel, and he had been carrying a traveling trunk, a stout leather case, far too large and heavy for any ordinary night errand, and he had been most particular that the trunk go out with him, and most disturbed when he learned it could not. The Queen and I looked at each other, and we did not need to say it aloud. "Find that trunk," the Queen said. "Find it before it finds the fire." I went myself, with Bran, who had returned from rousing the captain and would not be left behind, and with the careful lad from the postern to show us where the man Sorrel had gone. We found Sorrel without much trouble, because a sealed house has nowhere for a man to go. He was in the servants' hall by the stable court, sitting very still over a cup of ale he was not drinking, with the leather trunk on the floor between his feet, and the look on his face when 3 guardsmen came through the door was the look of a man who has understood that the ground has shifted and that he is standing on the wrong part of it. He was not Havern. He had not Havern's iron. He was a small frightened man who had done as he was told for a master he had been afraid to disobey, and when I sat down across from him and said, quietly, that the keeper was taken and the house was sealed, and that the only question left to him was whether he would be remembered as a man who helped the crown find the truth or as the last loyal servant of a thief, he began, after a little while, to talk. And the trunk, when we opened it before witnesses, told the rest of the tale that the burned books no longer could. It was full of papers, not the household ledgers, those were ash in the counting-house hearth. These were the other half of the account, the receiving half, the records Havern had been keeping safe to send to his confederate in the Treasury House across the city. Copies of the false orders, letters in a hand that was not Havern's, a ledger of payments made out to the relief of the coast and received nowhere near the coast, and folded at the very bottom, where a frightened man had thrust it, a sheet that listed in plain figures 3 years of false totals, the true sums and the stolen sums set side by side, a thief's own private reckoning, so that he would not be cheated by his partners. Eldred Havern had burned the crown's copy of his crime. He had not been able to burn this one, because it was already in the trunk, already on its way out the postern in the hands of his errand man, already meant for the Treasury House, and the Queen's order, the order that nothing should leave the palace that night, had stopped it at the gate. I sat back and looked at that trunk full of paper, and I thought about how close it had all come, and how thin the line had been. If Sorrel had reached the postern 10 minutes earlier, before the seal was set, the trunk would have been across the city and the second half of the evidence with it. If the lad on the gate had been a less careful boy, he might have let a known household servant through with his master's luggage and thought nothing of it. If the Queen had not asked, late and weary, the one simple question, has anything tried to leave? We might have hanged Havern on the blotting paper alone and never known there was a whole ring beyond him, never reached the man in the green coat, never recovered the 3 years of reckoning that would, in the end, send not 1 thief but 4 to answer for the theft. The whole of it had hung again and again on small things. A child up a ladder, a scrap of pink paper, a boy at a gate who did not like the look of a trunk, a queen who asked the right question. There is no great machine of justice, whatever the courts would like us to believe. There is only a chain of small fidelities, each one holding, and the chain holds or it does not. There is a name here, Sergeant, Brand said quietly, his finger on the topmost letter in the trunk, the one in the hand that was not Havern's. The man he wrote to. Look. I looked. The letter was addressed, in Havern's dry, careful hand, to a name and an office in the Treasury House, and beside the name was a small green seal, and I knew before Sorrel confirmed it that this was the man in the green coat with the gold collar, the receiver, the confederate, Havern's partner in 3 years of stealing the bread out of the mouths of the poor of the coast. His name was Master Jos Caro, and he was the deputy of the Treasury, and he was, at that very moment, asleep in his fine house across the city, not yet knowing that the trunk had not come, that the household was sealed, that the boy up no ladder he had ever feared had brought the whole of it down. We carried the trunk and its contents straight to the Queen, and she did not hesitate. The second man had to be taken before the morning, before any word could cross the city, before Caro woke and wondered why his expected delivery had not come and drew the right conclusion, and put his own half of the record into his own fire. This was no longer a matter for the household foot. The Treasury House lay beyond the palace walls, in the Crown's wider jurisdiction, and to take a deputy of the Treasury in his own bed required the Queen's writ and an officer of the law to carry it. So the Queen did, that night, in her own hand and under her own seal, what she had never in her reign had cause to do. She wrote out a warrant for the arrest of Jos Caro, deputy of the Treasury, for the theft of the Crown's relief moneys, and she gave it to the captain of the guard with orders to ride at once with a file of men and the Crown's own magistrate, to take Caro quietly in the dark, and to seal his house and his offices before he could so much as reach for a candle. They rode out through the one gate the Queen ordered briefly opened for them and barred again behind them, and the rest of us could do nothing but wait, and waiting, as I have said, is the hardest discipline of all. I spent the waiting time the only useful way I could think of, which was to see to the clerk. Tobias Wren had been brought to a small warm room near the Queen's apartments, and Pelham had told him on the way what I had asked Pelham to tell him, that the Queen knew he was no thief, that he was under her protection, that the truth was coming out. But a man does not unlearn his fear in an hour, and when I went in to him, I found a young fellow gray and hollow-eyed and shaking, a man who had spent 2 months being slowly crushed under more work than any soul could carry, watching his careful figures come out wrong no matter how he labored, certain that the failure was his own, and that ruin was coming for him, and who had now been roused in the dark and brought under guard to the Queen's own side of the palace and told, by men he had no reason yet to trust, that everything had turned. He did not know whether to believe it. He had the look of a man bracing for the trap to close. I sat down with him. I told him what had happened, plainly all of it, the child up the ladder, the words she had carried, the burned books, the blotting paper, the trunk at the gate, the warrant riding across the city. And I told him the thing I judged he most needed to hear, which was not that he was safe, but that he had not failed. Your figures were never wrong, lad, I said. You did the honest work, and you did it well, and every night you went home thinking you had lost the count. The count had not been lost. It had been changed, after you set down your pen, by a hand that came in behind yours. The work that came out wrong was not your work. It was made to come out wrong so that when the theft was finally found, the trail would lead to the new clerk who could not keep his books, and not to the keeper who had kept them for 30 years. You were not failing, Master Wren. You were being murdered slowly in your good name by a man who needed you ruined, and you very nearly were. But a child saw it and would not be quiet, and now you are not ruined. Now you are the Crown's chief witness, and the most honest man in the counting house, and when this is done your name will be cleaner than it has ever been. I have done a few things in my long service that I will carry with me when I go, and the look that came over that young man's face as he understood that he had not failed, that the slow nightmare of the last 2 months had a name, and the name was another man's crime, is one of them. He put his face in his hands and his shoulders shook, and I let him be, because a man has earned the right to that. And when he lifted his head again he was changed, the gray terror gone out of him and something steadier in its place. I will tell them everything I know, he said, every figure, every night. I kept my own copies, Sergeant, my own working notes, at my lodging, because I could not understand where the count was going wrong and I thought the fault was mine, so I copied my honest figures each night to study them. They are at my room. My honest figures before his hand touched them, if you set them beside the trunk's papers. Then we will have the crime twice over, I said softly. Once in the thief's reckoning and once in the honest man's notes, and no court in the realm will be able to look away from it. And I understood, sitting there, that the chain of small fidelities had one more link in it that none of us had known, a frightened honest clerk who, certain he was failing, had quietly kept a true record every night, never dreaming he was preserving the very evidence that would clear him. The honest do that. They keep faith with the truth even when the truth is breaking them. It is the thing the Haverns of the world never understand, and it is the thing that beats them in the end. I left Wren with Pelham to fetch his honest notes from the lodging under guard, and I went back toward the Queen's apartments to report, and on the way I learned that Eldred Havern, even taken, even held, was not yet finished, that a man who has spent 30 years building a fortress of trust does not surrender it because the gate has fallen. He fights for it from the rubble, with the only weapons he has left. He had asked courteously to send a message. He was held in a small chamber off the guardroom with two of the household foot at the door, and he had asked, with all the mild reasonableness in the world, whether he might send a written word to the Lady Brienne, his old friend, he said, who would be distressed by the night's wild rumors, and whom he wished only to reassure. It was, on its face, the most harmless request imaginable. An old man, taken on a child's tale, asking to send a kindly word to a worried friend. The guardsman who brought me the request saw no harm in it, and indeed there was a softness in the household that night, a residue of 30 years of trust, that wanted to grant such a man his small courtesies even as it held him. I did not grant it, and I will tell you why, because it is the same reason the whole of this account turns on, the reason a child saw what grown men could not. I asked to see the message before it was sent. Havern had no right to refuse, and he did not refuse. He handed it over with a small, dry smile, as though indulging a fussy sergeant. It was 3 lines. It said only that he was well, that the rumors flying through the house were the cruel imaginings of an overwrought child and the men who indulged her, that the truth would come out and clear him, and that dear Brienne should not trouble herself, but should be sure to comfort the poor little princess, who could not help her fancies and would be so frightened when she understood what trouble her stories had caused. Be sure to comfort the poor little princess. It was beautifully done. It was a knife wrapped in a blanket. Because the Lady Brienne loved the child, and loved Havern, and was racked with guilt at having laughed at Maelin that afternoon, and a message like that, delivered now, would do its quiet work on a guilty, grieving heart. It would plant, gently, with the authority of the wronged and dignified accused, the idea that the child's stories had caused all this trouble, that the poor little princess was a frightened, fanciful thing who would need comforting and managing, and above all, gentle correction. It was Havern's whole scheme in miniature, aimed now not at the clerk but at the child. The same machinery, the discrediting of the honest witness, run one last time from a prison chamber with a borrowed pen. And there was the small wrong detail, the thing only a man trained to look would catch. The message was warm. The message was wounded and forgiving and full of concern for the child. And nowhere in it, not in one line, did Eldred Havern deny the words. He did not write, "I never said such a thing." He did not write, "The child has confused me with another." He wrote around the words, over them, past them. He attacked the child's reliability and never once touched the substance of what she had reported, because he could not touch it, because the words were his, and a careful man does not put a lie in writing that can be set beside the truth and broken. An innocent man, accused of saying a monstrous sentence he had never spoken, writes first and loudest, "I did not say it." A guilty man, who knows the sentence is his, writes instead about the unreliability of the witness. Havern had written the guilty man's letter. He had told on himself in the shape of what he left out. I did not send it. I carried it instead to the Queen and the magistrate, and I laid it beside the blotting paper and the trunk, and I said, "Here is one more, Majesty, not a thing he forgot to burn, but a thing he chose to write. Read what is not in it. He is accused of speaking a sentence. He does not deny the sentence. He attacks the child who carried it. A man defends himself where he can. Where he cannot, he attacks the witness. This letter is a confession written in the spaces between the words." And the magistrate read it and read it again, and said that he had prosecuted 20 years of liars, and had rarely seen a man indict himself so completely while believing he was being clever, and he had the letter copied and sealed into the evidence, the warm, forgiving letter that was meant to ruin a little girl's good name, and that became, instead, one more nail. That was the last of Havern's moves. He had moved first that afternoon, going to the Queen before the child came down from the ladder. He had moved fast that evening, burning the books before we could seal the room. He had moved cleverly that night, leaving us, he thought, nothing but a child's word to hang him with. And now he had moved one last time from a prison chamber to discredit the child herself, and every move had failed, not because we were clever than he was, but because the truth leaves traces and the lie leaves gaps, and a man who has spent his life learning to read faces can learn, given a night, to read papers the same way. The child had taught me that, in a sense. She had brought me the truth by hearing the words that did not belong in a clerk's mouth. I had finished it by reading the denial that did not belong in an innocent man's letter. We had, the two of us, the 8-year-old and the old sergeant, the same gift after all. We looked at what was actually there. It was near dawn when the captain returned. He came straight to the Queen, and I was permitted to be in the room, and he made his report in the flat, clear voice of a man who has done a hard thing correctly. They had taken Jos Caro in his bed. They had reached his house before any word could. The city had been asleep. He had not had so much as a moment's warning. They had sealed his study with its papers untouched, and the Crown's magistrate had set a guard on it for the morning's examination, and Caro himself was now held under lawful arrest. He had said little, the captain reported, except, and here the captain's flat voice took on the smallest edge of grim satisfaction, except that when he was told the household had been sealed on the testimony of a witness, he had demanded, indignant, to know what manner of witness could have undone 3 years of careful work, and the magistrate had told him. The Princess Maelin, who is 8 years old, and who was reading a book about ships behind a tall shelf. And Jos Caro, deputy of the Treasury, the captain said, had gone very white and very quiet, and had not asked another question. There was one more pressure to come before the night was through, and it came, as such pressures always do, wearing the face of reason. It came in the person of the Lord Chamberlain, who had been roused by the sealing of the household and who arrived at the Queen's door near the grey edge of morning, immaculately dressed despite the hour, full of grave concern and gentle counsel. He was not a wicked man, the Lord Chamberlain. I want to be fair to him, because the danger he posed was the more real for his being decent. He was a careful man, a smoother of difficulties, a man whose whole long career had been built on making sure the House of Harrowgate was never embarrassed, never exposed, never the subject of ugly talk. And to such a man, the events of that night were not first a crime to be answered but a scandal to be contained. "Majesty," he said when she received him, and his voice was all soft reasonableness, "I am as grieved as any soul in this house by what I have learned, but I must counsel you, I would fail my office if I did not, to consider what the lifting of this seal at dawn will mean. The whole city will see that the palace barred its own gates in the night. The court will demand to know why. There will be talk of nothing else for a season. And all of it, Majesty, all of it, founded upon," he hesitated, delicately, "upon a child's account of an overheard conversation, and a quantity of paper that the lawyers will fight over for a year. Master Havern has 30 years of service and a great many friends. Master Caro is a deputy of the Treasury with friends of his own. If we move against them on what we now hold, and the courts in their slowness should find it wanting, the harm to the Crown's dignity would be very great and very lasting. I do not say do nothing. I say, lift the seal quietly, let the household return to its rest, let the matter be investigated discreetly, by trusted hands over the coming weeks, so that when we move, if we move on certainty, and not in the heat of a single alarming night. Discretion, Majesty. There is no harm that cannot be made worse by haste." It was the false dawn in its most seductive form, not the trap of looking one, but the trap of the reasonable middle road, the soft, sensible voice that says be careful, slow down, do not stake your good name on a child and a scrap of paper. And I will tell you plainly, because honesty is the spine of this account. For one cold moment in the weariness of that long night, the Lord Chamberlain's counsel sounded almost like wisdom. It is always at the end of the hardest watch, when a man is tired and frightened of having gone too far, that the voice of careful retreat is sweetest. But the Queen had already chosen her road, hours before, kneeling on the carpet in front of her daughter, and she did not unchoose it now. "My lord," she said, and her voice was very even, which was how I had learned to know she was at her most immovable, "you speak of discretion, and you are right that haste does harm. But hear what you are truly counseling, and hear it plainly. You counsel me to lift the seal, send the household to its rest, and investigate quietly over the coming weeks. And in those weeks, my lord, answer me, what becomes of the half of the evidence that lies tonight in Master Carrow's study across the city, the moment he is free to reach it? What becomes of the trust of an honest clerk who has been told the crown will protect him, the moment we hesitate? What becomes of the lesson taught to every soul in this house, when they see that a great man with friends may rob the poor for 3 years and answer for it only quietly, only carefully, only if it can be done without embarrassment? You call it discretion. I call it the slow burning of the proof and the slower teaching that the powerful are answerable only when it is convenient. No. The seal holds. We move tonight, lawfully and correctly and in the open, and if the city talks, let it talk. Let it say that the House of Harrowgate barred its own gates in the night rather than let a thief carry the truth out the postern. That is not a tale that shames me, my lord. That is the only tale I would have told of my reign. The Lord Chamberlain bowed his head. He was, as I said, a decent man, and a decent man knows when he has been answered. As your majesty commands, he said, and there was, I thought, a little relief under the deference, the relief of a careful man who has spoken his caution, been overruled by a courage larger than his own, and may now do the right hard thing with a clear conscience. He served the rest of that business well, in fact, and never once dragged his feet, and I came to think better of him for it. The seal held, and because it held, the night's work held, and the morning's proof was there to be gathered, because no one had been let out to burn it. The morning came gray and hard over Harrowgate, and with the morning came the slow, careful work of proving what the night had only seized. The Queen's own clerks chosen for their honesty and set under oath, with the Crown's magistrate watching every page, took up the examination of the evidence, and one by one, the small wrong things spoke. The blotting paper spoke first, and it spoke loudest. They took the pink leaf from the desk where it had lain untouched under guard, and they held it to a glass, and read it backwards in the mirror, and there, faint and reversed but unmistakable, was the ghost of everything Havern had thought he had burned. The false totals pressed up out of the wet ink, the forged line of the order made out to the relief of the coast, and pressed last and clearest, because it had been the last thing he wrote before we came, the figure of the night's intended theft and the direction it was meant to travel. The blotting paper had drunk his crime and kept it. The clerks copied it out fair, both the mirror and the true reading side by side, and the magistrate signed each sheet, and the thing was beyond denying. The trunk spoke next, its 3 years of debellentry reckoning laid out on a long table. The true sums the relief should have received, the false sums Havern had ordered, and the difference, a great and ugly difference, the measure of how many storm-broken villages had gone unrebuilt, and how many hungry coast towns had gone unfed, so that 2 trusted men could grow quietly rich behind the shield of the Crown's mercy. And Wren's honest notes, fetched from his lodging, lay beside the trunk and matched it line for line, the clerk's true figures and the thief's secret reckoning agreeing exactly on what the honest count had been, and disagreeing only where the forging hand had come in behind. The crime was written twice over, once by the guilty and once by the innocent, exactly as I had told Wren it would be. And the seal spoke. The Prince Consort Aldrich, who had a scholar's patience for such things, sat with the magistrate over the broken wax of the forged order, and the seals of a dozen genuine orders for comparison, and showed how the impression on the false order leaned the wrong way, pressed by a man working quickly and alone in a locked room, not by a clerk authorizing a document in the proper course. A small wrongness, invisible to anyone not looking for it. That put the keeper's own seal in the keeper's own hand, on the very document that stole from the Crown. Through all of it, Eldred Havern kept his composure, and I will grant him that much. He was made of harder stuff than his confederate. When he was brought before the Queen and the magistrate to answer, he stood with his hands folded and his white head high, and he tried, even then, the only weapon he had left, which was his name. He spoke of his 30 years. He spoke of the trust the Crown had placed in him, of the impossibility, the absurdity, that a man of his long service should be accused on the strength of a child's tale and a clerk's scribbles and a scrap of blotting paper. He was eloquent. He was dignified. He was, for a few minutes, very nearly persuasive, because 30 years of trust is a real weight and it does not vanish in a night. But the Queen let him finish, and then she did the thing she did best, which was to ask one quiet question that left a clever man with nothing to stand on. "Master Havern," she said, "you have told us a great deal about your 30 years. I will ask you only one thing, and I will ask you to answer it before this magistrate and before God. My daughter, who is 8, repeated to me a sentence she could not have invented because it uses words she does not know. The sentence was, 'The Lammas figures will not survive a true audit, but there will be no true audit because I am the one who orders them.' I have heard it said that perhaps the child misheard, or dreamed it, or that the sergeant put it into her mouth. So I ask you plainly, Master Havern, who knows the words of his own trade, is that a sentence that anyone in this palace but you would have any reason to speak? Did anyone but you have the power to order the audits, or to prevent them? Tell me before God who else could have said those words, and if no one else could, then tell me how a child of 8 came to have them, if not from your own mouth in a room you thought was empty." And Eldred Havern, who had answered every charge with eloquence, had no answer for that. He opened his mouth, and the dry, careful words did not come, because there were no words. The sentence was his and could be no one else's, and every soul in the room knew it, and he knew that they knew. The composure that had held all night finally broke, not into rage, not into pleading, but into a kind of gray stillness, the stillness of a man who has come to the end of his fortress and found there is nothing behind the last wall. He looked for the first time like what he was, an old thief who had been caught, not by an auditor or a spy or a rival, but by a small girl reading a book about ships, and who would now answer for everything. "It seems," he said at last very quietly, "that I underestimated the room." And he said no more and was led away, and the great machinery of the Crown's lawful justice closed over him and over Jos Caro, and over the smaller men they had drawn into their scheme, and ran its slow, honest course. It was not even then an easy course, and I will not pretend it was, because the easy telling, the thief confesses, the court nods, the gavel falls, is a child's idea of justice, and the truth is harder and better. Havern and Caro had money, and money buys lawyers, and the lawyers did exactly what I had feared from the first hour. They did not argue the figures because the figures could not be argued. They argued the witness. They argued that the whole edifice of the Crown's case rested, at its foundation, on a sentence reported by a child of 8, and that everything else, the blotting paper, the trunk, the leaning seal, had only been found because grown men went looking on the strength of that one unreliable report. Discredit the child, and you discredit the search, and you discredit the search, and the proof itself becomes the fruit of a poisoned root. It was clever. It was the only road left to them, and they took it hard. I was called to give my testimony in open court, and I gave it plainly as I have set it down here, and I braced for them to come at me about the princess. They did. A smooth advocate in a fine gown asked me, with every show of gentle reason, whether it was not true that I had a particular fondness for the young princess, whether she did not stop at my post and tell me tales, whether a doting old guardsman might not have been only too willing to believe a fanciful child, and whether he let it hang, whether the words I claimed she had reported might not have been words I had supplied to her myself, an old soldier's notion of how a thief might talk, put into a little girl's mouth. I had expected it, and I had thought long about how to answer it, and in the end I answered it the only way an honest man can, which is with the plain truth and no heat. "Sir," I said, "I have stood the inner posts of Harrowgate Palace for 19 years, and in that time I have learned exactly one thing worth knowing, which is the difference between a person telling the truth and a person being disbelieved. I did not supply the princess her words. I could not have. I am a guardsman. I do not know the trade of the counting house. I did not know what a Lammas figure was until that child said it. I did not know that an honest clerk could be ruined by being given too much work and then blamed for it, until she told me a man had planned exactly that. If I had set out to invent a thief's confession to put in a little girl's mouth, sir, I could not have invented that one, because I did not have the words to invent it with. Neither did she. There was only one man in this realm who had those words, and who had the power to order the audits and to prevent them, and the Crown found his crime written twice over in his own ink before ever it came to this court. You may call the child fanciful if you like. You cannot call her learned in the secret arts of embezzlement, for she is 8, and the words she carried were learned, and she carried them perfectly, which leaves you only one door, sir, and it is the door you do not wish to open. She heard them. From him. The advocate had no second question. There was, the clerk of the court told me afterward, a silence in the room when I stepped down that he had rarely heard in 20 years of trials, the silence of people who have watched a clever attack break against a plain fact. And the Crown's case, which had seemed for a morning to teeter on the credibility of a child, stood up straight again, because the very thing the lawyers had tried to use against her, that she was only 8, was the thing that proved her. For a girl of 8 cannot invent the vocabulary of a crime she has no way to know. And the Prince Consort, who testified after me to that exact point with a scholar's quiet authority, made the court feel the impossibility of it in their bones. In the fullness of time, and on the mountain of proof that the child's word had let us reach in time, the blotting paper, the trunk, the honest clerk's notes, the leaning seal, the unsigned confession in the thief's own hand, they answered for all of it. The small wrong things, each one holding. The chain unbroken. I have told the hard part of this account. Let me tell the rest of it, the part that came after, because a story that ends with the thief led away is only half a story, and the better half is what the Crown does with the truth once it has it. The Queen did 3 things in the weeks that followed, and I have always thought they tell you more about Maelin of Harrowgate than any chronicle of her reign. The first thing she did was for the coast. The reckoning in the trunk had shown, to the penny, how much had been stolen from the relief over 3 years, how much bread and timber and shelter had been turned aside from the storm-broken harbor towns into the pockets of 2 trusted men. The Queen did not let that sum vanish into the general accounts of the recovered estates, where it would have done a clerk's tidy good and no one's real good. She ordered it restored to the relief of the coast in full, every penny, out of the forfeited fortunes of the men who had stolen it, and she ordered besides that the fund be opened, for the first time, to a true and public audit each year. The very thing Havern had boasted would never come, because he was the one who ordered it. He hid behind my mercy, she said, because my mercy had no eyes. Now it will have eyes. And in the spring, when the thaw came, the rebuilding that had been quietly starved for 3 years began in earnest along the coast, and the harbor towns that never knew how close they had come to being robbed of it nonetheless got their sea walls and their granaries, and the children of those towns grew up in houses that stood because a princess they would never meet had refused to be told she was imagining things. I will tell you one small thing about the coast, because I saw it with my own eyes from my post, and it has stayed with me. Late that summer, a delegation came up from one of the farthest harbor villages, a place called Tarn Reach, a poor cluster of fishing houses at the edge of the map that had lost its sea wall in a great storm 3 winters past, and had been waiting, year upon year, for the relief that never quite came, never understanding why a crown that had promised should seem to forget them. They came to thank the Queen, for the wall was being rebuilt at last, and they did not know, they could not have known, that the reason it had not come for 3 years was that a man in a fine office had been turning their wall into his own fortune, nor that the reason it came now was a child up a ladder. They came in their best clothes, which were poor clothes, and they were shy in the great corridors, and they passed my post on their way to the audience hall, an old fisherman at the head of them with his cap crushed in his 2 hands. He did not know me from any other guard, but he stopped, just for a moment in front of my post, the way people do before a thing they think is a statue, and he said to me or to himself or to the painted Harrowgates on the wall, "We thought the crown had forgotten us. My old mother died thinking it. And here it is after all." And he went on into the hall to thank a queen for a mercy that a little girl had rescued from a thief, and he never knew, and I could not tell him, and I stood my post with my eyes forward and something thick in my throat, because that is what the chain of small fidelities is finally for. Not for the courts, and not for the credit, and not even for the truth as an abstract thing. For the old man at Tarn Reach, and the wall that would hold the next storm, and the children who would grow up behind it, not knowing they had ever been in danger at all. That is the whole of it. That is what the watch is kept for. The second thing she did was for the clerk. Tobias Wren, who had come up from the harbor a frightened, honest young man and been slowly broken in his good name by a thief who needed a scapegoat, was cleared before the whole household, not quietly, not with a murmured word that the matter had been looked into, but plainly and publicly, so that every soul who had watched him grow gray under suspicion would know that the suspicion had been a lie deliberately built. The Queen named him, in time, to a place of real trust in the very counting-house where he had nearly been destroyed, and set the new yearly audit partly in his charge, on the principle, which I thought a wise one, that the man who had kept honest books while another hand falsified them behind his back was exactly the man you wanted watching the books from then on. He kept them well. He keeps them still. And he never forgot, he told me once, years later, that the difference between a ruined man and a trusted one had been a little girl who would not stop saying a true thing, and a sergeant who believed her when no one else would. The third thing she did was for the child, and it was the smallest and the largest of the three. She did not make a public spectacle of the Princess Maelin. The Queen understood, as I understood, that a child who has been brave should not be turned into a story told over her own head, a pet wonder, a little heroine paraded before the court, that there is a way of praising a child that takes the thing away from her and makes it the grown-ups again. So the Queen did not do that. What she did instead, on a quiet evening when the worst of it was over, was to call the princess to her and me with her. And she said to her daughter, in front of the one guard who had believed her, the thing that mattered. "Maelin," she said, "I want you to remember something for the whole of your life, and I want you to remember that I, the Queen, your mother, said it to you, so that no one can ever take it from you. 3 grown people you trusted told you that you had imagined a true thing. They were not wicked. They were only certain, and being certain made them deaf. You were 8 years old, and you were right, and they were grown, and they were wrong, and the difference was not cleverness, and it was not age. The difference was that you looked at what was actually there, and they looked at what they expected to see. Most people, my darling, lose that. They get older and they learn what to expect, and then they stop seeing. Do not lose it. Whatever else you become, and you will become a great deal, do not ever stop looking at the room that is actually there. And when someone smaller than you, or younger than you, or with less power than you, comes and tells you a true thing that is hard to believe, you remember this winter, and you believe them until they give you a reason not to. That is the whole of it. That is the only lesson worth the having." And the Princess Maelin, who had carried a thief's confession down from a rolling ladder and held her nerve through a night that had broken grown men, looked up at her mother and said, with the perfect gravity of the young, "I will not stop looking, Mama." And I believed her, the way I had believed her in the cold gallery, completely, because in 19 years at the inner posts I have learned to tell a child who means a thing from a child who does not, and she meant it. She kept her word, too. I watched her grow up, in the years that followed, into a woman who could not be lied to, and could not be told that the weak were not worth listening to. And the realm is the better for her to this day. And a part of me likes to think that some of it, only some, began on a gray winter afternoon in front of a guard's post, with a frightened girl saying, "I think nobody will believe me." There were others changed by that winter, and I should set them down, for they earned it. Corporal Bran Adler, who had thought first of the man and not the books, and who had carried the paper through the snow with his hands kept clean for the magistrate, was made a sergeant within the year, and a better one than I ever was, and he served the house until his hair went white. Old Pelham, who had risked his own service on a comrade's word in a cold corridor and then walked fast enough down a long passage to put his broad hand over an unsigned page, would never take any credit for it, and called it the smallest thing in the world, the way the best men always do. And the Lady Brienne, who had laughed at a child and sent her away, and who had stood stricken in the firelight when she understood what she had done, did the hardest and most honest thing of all the people in this account, harder in its way than anything I did, for she went to the Princess Maelin of her own accord, and knelt to her as the Queen had knelt, and asked the child's pardon plainly for not having listened, and did not excuse herself, and did not soften it. Maelin forgave her at once, the way children do, with no grudge in it. But the Lady Brienne did not forgive herself so easily, and she was, from that day, the fiercest soul in the whole palace for the listening to of small voices, and more than once in the years after I saw her stop and bend and truly hear out some underservant or page or frightened young thing that the rest of the household would have waved aside, and I knew where she had learned it, and at what cost. And there was a change in the house itself, quiet and unwritten but real, which I have always thought the truest monument of that winter. Before, a child who came to a grown person with a strange report was a nuisance to be managed, a fever to be dosed, a fancy to be smiled at. After, not all at once but surely, that was no longer quite the way of it. Word had gone round, in the way word does, of how the whole great fortress of Eldred Havern's 30 years had fallen because one small girl saw a true thing and would not be quiet, and the moral of it sank into the bones of the household more deeply than any decree could have driven it. That the truth does not always come from the high and the trusted, that it comes as often from the low and the small and the easily dismissed, and that a wise house keeps an ear open to the bottom of itself as well as the top. I cannot prove the change, you cannot weigh such a thing. But I stood my post and watched the palace go by for many years after that winter, and I will tell you that I saw grown men stoop to listen to children where once they would have hurried past, and I never quite stopped believing that a little of it traced back to a sergeant's post in the long gallery, and a paper under a table with brass lions, and a girl who held her breath. As for me, when it was all done, I went back to my post. That is the part people never quite understand about my trade. There is no parade for the watchman who notices the right thing. There is only the next watch. The morning after the court gave its final judgment, I was in the long gallery again before dawn, standing in the worn place in the marble where 10,000 boots had stood before mine, with my eyes forward and my face like stone, watching the people of the palace go by. The painted Harrowgates looked down from their frames as they always had. The cold came in off the tall windows as it always did. And nothing about me, to any eye that passed, said that this was the man who had brought down the keeper of the Privy Purse. That is as it should be. A guard who needs to be thanked is a guard who has misunderstood the work. But there was one small thing, and it was enough. A little while into the watch, the Princess Maelin came down the gallery, on her way to her lessons, walking with her chin level and her step unhurried, the way I had taught her to walk when she wanted to be invisible. And as she passed my post she did not stop, and she did not speak, because she knew the rules of the place as well as I did. But she looked up at me just for a moment, the way she had always looked up at me, studying my face for the small signs that I was a person and not a carving, the blink, the breath, the place at my jaw where the strap of the helm pressed. And I gave her, while my eyes stayed forward and my face stayed still and the whole gallery saw nothing at all, the smallest thing a man can give and still have it count. I let the corner of my mouth move. Half an inch, no more. A thing only she would catch, and only because she had spent her whole short life learning to read the faces of men who were not allowed to have them. She caught it, of course she caught it. She always caught everything. And she went on down the gallery to her lessons with something lit behind her face, and I went back to watching the room that was actually there. And that is where my account ends. Not with a thief led away, though the thief was led away, and not with a fortune restored, though the fortune was restored, but with a child who had been believed, and who would spend the rest of her life believing others, walking past the post of the one man who had listened, both of them keeping in their different ways the same long faithful watch. For that in the end is the whole of the trade, and the whole of the honor in it. The grown world trains itself not to see. The child sees. And somewhere between the two there must stand a man who will look at what is actually there, and believe the small true voice that no one else will believe, and act on it before the careful clever liars can put it out. I stood that watch once on a gray winter afternoon, because an 8-year-old girl trusted me enough to bring me the truth, and 3 other people had already sent her away. I have stood many watches. That is the one I would choose to be remembered by, if a watchman were ever remembered at all, which, God willing and the work done right, he is not.